Hello, everyone. It is so good to be back with you here today. And if you are listening for the first time, welcome. Today, we are going to be talking about how to help kids cope with trauma. But what exactly is trauma? What distinguishes it from anxiety? What happens when our bodies forget how to tell when we're safe? And how does trauma lead to an executive functioning override? Well, if you've been listening to this podcast before, you know when I'm asking questions in the beginning, it means that we're going to answer them in the episode. And today we have with us a nationally recognized expert on trauma recovery and PTSD, Dr. Cheryl Arutt. Dr. Cheryl is a sought-after mental health commentator on national television programs and podcasts, and she's a high-profile speaker and forensic consultant. She strongly believes in the human capacity to heal from trauma and is passionate about advocating for the understanding of mental health issues, both in and beyond the consulting room. You are going to love this conversation and you're going to learn a great deal. I can't wait.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Dr. Cheryl, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I am thrilled that you're here. It's been a long time in the making, but you're finally here.
We did it.
Yes, we did. And I'm so excited. It's while we're recording this, it's like the end of the academic year. And we, in our household, we're celebrating the resilience and the hard work of our kids. And I think we're all doing that collectively.
Yes. A collective deep breath of relief. Another year is finished and everybody made it.
Absolutely. And, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast is because, our kids have shown tremendous resilience probably over the last 3 years. But we know that some have struggled. Many have struggled more than others. Many are still struggling. And what's interesting is that parents are often describing the experience of struggling in school as a trauma for some kids, a stressor. And families are watching, family members become ill or die from COVID. Kids are hearing about school shootings here in the US. And all family members are describing these as traumatic experiences that can compound. And I wanted to have you on the podcast to kind of help us tease apart what distinguishes trauma from anxiety, what is PTSD, because a lot of parents are looking at their kids and wondering, is there something I should pay attention to? Is this just normal anxiety? Or is this a trauma that I should be, addressing in some way? So that's a lot to unpack.
Yes.
And, maybe even just starting with kind of what distinguishes trauma from anxiety, and then we can go from there.
That's a great question. Everybody experiences anxiety at time. Well, except for psychopaths. So if you experience no anxiety at all, that's a problem. But everybody has some level of anxiety, something that happens. We're wired for survival. We're wired for things to be safe and not safe. And what distinguishes trauma is when your nervous system gets overwhelmed. And so the normal systems that we have to heal and process and kind of digest what's happened and make meaning of it and move forward get stuck. And our bodies forget to know how to tell when we're safe. Mm-hmm. I think Judith Herman called it that. I think there are a number of different definitions of trauma. I really like hers, that it's like your nervous system gets stuck in a gear where it doesn't know how to get out. I think Bessel van der Kolk has some great ways of talking about it, that we get overwhelmed, or we shut down, or we get very, very negative and reactive. Dan Siegel would say, we react instead of respond, or we're on the low road instead of the high road when we get dysregulated. So I guess there's that other piece too, that trauma is dysregulating, in that we're not in that sweet spot where we get to use our whole brain. And we're able to really think about what we want to do next. And with kids, especially that part, as you know, that part is still under construction. And we as parents are trying to help kids stay in that zone where they're not either overwhelmed or shut down. Because that's the other thing we can see with trauma is that people can get, they freeze. They check out. Like if a kid goes numb and just isn't responding to anything, we see that with kids and adults sometimes. And the very upset or overwhelmed acting out is the other end of the spectrum, but we can really see both.
And that's really important for parents listening to know, is that it can look very different in different kids. You can have the shutdown and then you can have the acting out. And I think sometimes parents see these behaviors and are unsure, when they should be concerned, because there's a lot has happened over the last 3 years. A lot has happened over the last 2 months
Yes.
for kids to kind of unpack. And can these traumas be cumulative? As I started talking about kind of the 3 years of COVID, and then you add on, maybe family members being impacted. And then you have the school shootings, which our teens are probably more aware of. And can these compound to make it more problematic for kids to process?
So much has happened. We have been through so much with this pandemic, and suddenly things that were normally safe were not safe, like going and being with people and playing and going outside in groups, and with people getting sick and dying, and all of the chronic change and stress. And one of the things that causes trauma is unpredictability. We like to know what to expect. And as parents, we like to know what to expect. And if things are changing at work, or, is school in person or not, or whoops, we tried to start, but now we're not. And you're getting these notifications about kids being exposed, or there are so many things that have been randomly, unpredictably requiring these adjustments to what's going to happen next. And that takes an incredible toll on all of our nervous systems, so that there's less of an extra buffer when something acute happens. And then on top of it, we have things like these school shootings and these acute traumas that are happening that are horrifying. And there isn't a baseline of safety that we can keep seamlessly returning to. And so creating as much safety as we can and as much predictability in the home is very reassuring for kids, because they know what to expect, even if it's simple, like this is when we have dinner, or we do a story before we go to bed, or, creating as much as possible a sense of we're here, we're with you, or I'm with you if you're a single parent, and being able to have some kind of a traditions and rituals and things that we do that connect us with each other, that feel safe, and that are things that can be looked forward to, and that create some kind of predictability.
Absolutely. And it seems like the things that are leading to and contributing to the trauma, the lack of predictability, a loss of safety, if we can address those things from what I'm hearing from you, then that can actually decrease the stress associated with the trauma.
That's right. That's exactly right. We are living, I think, in probably the most exciting time for trauma treatment and recovery. We used to have no idea what to do. We really didn't. And I think that one of the real game changers was fMRI, and being able to be able to look at the brain when it's working. I mean, you have these people saying these crazy things like we only use 10% of our brain. It just came out in a recent movie this year. They use that. I'm thinking, oh my God, are people still saying
it's infuriating.
This?
I know.
It's not a thing, right? But the thing is that there's so much that we're learning about the nervous system, just the Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, recognizing that we have this wiring from our brainstem that goes to all these parts in our guts and our throat and our heart that takes in these information about safety and danger. And one of the things that signals the safety and helps change the nervous system is signaling safety. And that's when we feel safe to connect. I mean, one of the things that I think is so cool that makes us different from reptiles is this adaptation to be able to signal not just threat, but to signal safety so that we as social beings can get close to each other, to know who it's okay to be friends with and fall in love with and go to. And there are these new ways of approaching trauma that are not looking at just our thoughts, because that part of our brain is not available when we are dysregulated. It completely shuts down. So trying to teach somebody something or speak a lesson to them or trying to even engage them. I mean, if you're dysregulated and your spouse is dysregulated, that's probably not a great time to have a deeply important discussion, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Nobody's as smart as they are normally. So these kind of bottom up approaches that we're starting to use where it's from the nervous system up rather than top down from your brain and the words, that's really exciting. And that's also really effective with kids.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned that bottom up versus top down, because anyone who has seen a child dysregulated know that is not a good time to reason with them
Right.
and to have them, problem solve or make any rational decisions, because what you're describing is trauma, that dysregulation, it overrides the executive functioning system. And so adults even can't access their thinking when they're in that state of dysregulation.
That's right. So connecting first and doing things like breathing. I mean, breathing, and when we're anxious, we tend to take these big inhales and these really fast exhales. But if you can flip that, if you can breathe in and then try to exhale longer, that is a way of hacking into that parasympathetic system and having your body start to calm down. And we can do that with our kids. We can do that even like with a baby that's upset. If you take in a breath and you exhale a longer breath and kind of transmit that kind of chest to chest, it's really, it's powerful. It's really powerful. And breathing is also, we can do stuff with kids like if you have a little toy, like a boat or something, and you have a child lying on their back, you put a little toy on their belly, it teaches belly breathing. And also, can they make the boat go up? And can they make the boat go down with their breath? And it's a game. But it's also really helpful when things get difficult to be able to breathe. It doesn't solve everything, but it gets enough of your brain back that you are in a better spot to figure out what you want to do next.
Absolutely. And it's something that they can do anywhere, that they can, once they have that tool and they know how to use it, and they know how to breathe, wherever they are, they can use that tool to self-regulate, to calm the nervous system. And like you said, it doesn't, solve everything, but in the moment, it can, create some sense of calm.
Right. And this is hard. I mean, one of the things that I think is important for parents to know is that parenting, as I'm sure everybody knows already, is hard under normal circumstances. We've had some next level challenges to deal with, and losses, and times where parents have been struggling themselves to stay regulated and feel safe. And the other thing is, if you have any trauma in your history, new trauma can reactivate old trauma. So you can have things sort of back up on you that you thought you were fine with and didn't bother you, and you could function great before you got, stuck in your house with everybody for this long, or before these other things have happened. I mean, even at this point, there are so many people who've experienced either directly or peripherally these school shootings. And every time a new one happens, all of the people who experienced that before have their own intrusive kinds of activation. And then there's everyone else who has the fearful activation as well. So recognizing that our system is set up, our nervous system is set up to protect us from threat. But fear is an immediate threat. And a fear response is adaptive. If something were happening where you were under attack, having a fear response and that activation would help you. But to go to school every day and think, is it going to happen today? Is that person somebody who's going to do something to hurt me? Even I think having these drills, I really personally don't think that these active shooter drills have been very beneficial. And I think that they're traumatizing because I don't think that they create a sense of mastery. And people don't always know that they're drills. And I think we've got to find some other ways of addressing and making things safer instead of trying to normalize and acclimate to some things that other countries don't worry about.
Right. And it's interesting that you talked about, trauma and, re-experiencing trauma, because kids, like adults, will react to things that remind them of the trauma. So as you're talking about these drills, that can elicit a memory of seeing or hearing about these school shootings. And so we have to be mindful of that as well. Like, what does that do to kids and teens when they are in environments that are reminding them of a particular trauma?
That's such a great point because, our brains, as they're association making machines. We put things together and our brains have this part that goes, when the bad thing happened, pay attention to what was around when the bad thing happened. So if you see it again, you'll be ready. And the problem with PTSD is that those triggers end up generalizing more and more and more, where there are false alarms over and over again. And there's all this wear and tear that happens because we are reacting to things that are not dangerous in the moment, but they're reminders because of the re-experiencing that you were just talking about.
Absolutely. And, for most people, these school shootings are unusual. But if I take it down to some of the kids that we work with who are struggling in school and are embarrassed because of reading difficulties, or they're getting messages from the teacher that they're not paying attention and their peers are looking at them in a negative way. All of these cumulative things can create some of those stressors that you're talking about. And then the school becomes the trigger, because just going to school, on a Monday morning, walking in those doors, seeing peers can also elicit some of those responses.
Yes, those are traumas too.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the experiences that kids have in school, if they're bullied, if they're neurodivergent, and they have these experiences where they get overwhelmed, or they feel ashamed or embarrassed, or their teachers don't know how to attune and connect to them and make them feel seen and known. All of these kinds of ruptures, or even just the demand to do something a neurotypical kid would do, where, a kid doesn't want to go to a party or can't, leave the car. And these kinds of things are also can get encoded in the brain as traumas also. And, I really love, EMDR as one of these bottom up, reprocessing trauma memories and turning them into regular memories kind of approaches. And it's really amazing for kids. And a lot of times actually, some of the approaches that we're using, because trauma and other types of acting out or acting in diagnoses can have so much overlap, it can be incredibly helpful for kids who are experiencing these traumas to be able to get some EMDR to target and take down the emotional charge of these trauma experiences, because then they feel safer and they're more receptive to be able to learn and engage and have OT or have, whatever supports, as you were saying, you can't reason with a kid when they're dysregulated, and we don't learn best when we don't feel safe. So to be able to target those things and bring that down and get that in the rear view so that the child is available to make the most of other things and isn't just braced for the next bad thing, is incredibly exciting. So, I'm excited about the options that we have.
And it is absolutely exciting when you know that there are treatments for kids who are experiencing PTSD and trauma. And you mentioned EMDR. For those who are listening who may not be familiar with that, can you describe a little bit about what that treatment looks like? I know we could probably do a whole episode on it, and maybe we will. But for those who may not be familiar with the term, tell us a little bit about it.
EMDR has really gotten a lot of publicity recently, I think because Prince Harry went on TV with Oprah, and in this whole series that they did on trauma, and he had an EMDR session on camera about, and we all know what his trauma was. EMDR it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. And the psychologist who discovered it, Francine Shapiro, said it was a branding nightmare that if she had to do it over, she would call it reprocessing therapy. It's a mouthful and people get confused about the letters. But there are a couple of different theories about how and why it works, what the mechanism of it is. But what it seems to do by using bilateral stimulation, which is basically alternating either with tapping or eye movements or different kinds of things off the midline of the body, it seems to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And it seems to take memories that were kind of too hot to handle and too overwhelming that we think got stored incorrectly in the brain the first time. It's almost like they get stored. I think of it as like a ball of raw sensory information. You get pictures, body sensations, feelings, and there's always like a negative belief about the self in there. Like, if this is happening, what does that say about me? And by doing this very gentle technique where the person's in control the whole time and they don't really have to talk about it that much, which is really great, through this structured way of working, that memory, it's almost like your brain's own natural process that we also do during REM sleep, kind of goes, oh, I forgot to do that one. I forgot to digest that one. And you actually feel the emotional charge and the upset diminish until it becomes neutral. And your brain makes all these connections that it couldn't make before because it was pushing away this upsetting thing that it didn't want to think about. And it allows you to more adaptively think about things that were really upsetting before. And it's incredible. And we can do this with kids. There are group protocols. There are people there's a guy, Nacho Herrero, who's amazing, who has these task forces that go to places where there have been natural disasters, earthquakes, other things. And they get a bunch of kids together on the beach and they have them draw the trauma and they do the bilateral stimulation. And at a certain point, various kids are like, okay, I'm going to go play now. Like they're like, I don't need to be doing this anymore. And they've reprocessed it. It's so amazing. And it's really exciting.
And that's exciting for parents who are listening to know that there are treatments that have been developed to address these traumas and that kids can move past them and feel better. They can be more regulated. And what I'm also hearing, and we talked about this before we started recording, is that some parents will hear about the big T and the little t in terms of trauma and think, well, the little t's, you don't need to pay attention to them, those little traumas. But I'd love for you to talk about that because I think people have been making this distinction between big T and little t trauma. And does it mean that the little t trauma is not something that needs to be addressed?
Yes. Everybody knows. Okay. Yes, meaning no, it is something that does need to be addressed.
Yes.
Everyone knows big T traumas are traumas. They're the plane crashes. They're the natural disasters. They're, witnessing a murder, being, all the really big stuff that we know to be traumas. We refer to as big T traumas. They're kind of like the obvious ones. Small T traumas can be insidious because they're cumulative and they back up on you. So if you had just one and that was the only one that happened to you, you might be able to kind of deal with that. But if you have 5, 10, 100, it wears you down. And these are things that are also traumatic because of the learning that goes on at that time. So a small T trauma can be somebody saying something really mean to you, a bullying thing, a parent shaming you. It can be a microaggression. It can be a bunch of times when somebody makes you feel less than, or not good enough, or like you don't matter, or that you don't have the right to feel good about yourself or be treated well. And when that learning happens and it gets reinforced with all these small T traumas, it powerfully influences the way that we feel about ourselves and what we think we can expect from the world.
And that's a really good point that you talked about insidious and cumulative, because so many kids that I work with, that, a lot of my colleagues work with, will describe those experiences, and parents will describe those experiences. And for some kids, being like right now is a wonderful time for some kids, particularly who are experiencing a lot of those small T traumas in the school setting. They don't want to read out loud because they're going to be embarrassed. All the kids' artwork or their schoolwork is put up on the board and put up on the walls so everyone can see. And they're the ones who you can clearly see are struggling with written expression and motor coordination, and their artwork doesn't look like the same as their peers. All of those, from what I'm hearing from you, can be little T's. And so it can be a relief to be out of that school environment, which also serves as a reminder of those little T traumas that you're describing.
Yes, exactly. And I think when I hear you reflect that back so beautifully about what the kids' experiences are, it also makes me think about shame.
Yes.
And the experience of shame and how incredibly painful that is. And how traumatic it is to have chronic or toxic shame experiences, and to be able to let somebody see you and know you and to feel seen and accepted instead of seen in a painful, shameful kind of way, is really powerful. So on the one hand, yes, there's a relief of not having to go and feel like you're painfully on display at school and being compared. And that's a relief. There's also a piece that I would really love for the kids who are getting relief from that, to also be able to find their tribe, to be able to find places where they can be seen and known in a way that doesn't feel like that.
Absolutely. And that's that connection piece again, right? It's not only about feeling connected to an adult. We know that's important, but having those peer connections is equally important.
Absolutely. And connection protects us from addiction. It also protects us from a lot of trauma. I mean, people who, it's really interesting. People who are on their own or separated from their support system and their families, or don't really have a good support system, do not do as well and are not as resilient as people who can stick together or go through something together and say, hey, this is really hard, or we've just had this really big loss and we're all hurting right now, but we have each other and we're going to go forward, and there are going to be good things to look forward to in the future, and we're safe now, or we got through this and we're safe now. And to be able to have that makes an enormous difference.
Yes, we're safe now. I love that. What are some things that parents can do? We're recording this during the summer to kind of build their kids' resilience during the summer. And then also, pretty soon, before we know, in the blink of an eye, we'll be transitioning back to school. And we want our kids to be able to manage stress as they transition back to school. So what are some things that parents can do to support kids, to build up their resilience, and also help them to manage stress when it is time to transition back?
Well, some of the things I think are, as much as we want to have a break in the summer and a vacation, it's good to just kind of keep the brain working in some ways, like if it's playing games together or that we don't take such a break from using certain parts of our brain that it's hard to ramp up again. But we don't want to make the summer feel like school, of course.
Right.
So I'm not suggesting people go and do all this homework either. I think that games, and also talking to kids, kind of, Dan Siegel talks about like name it to tame it. I'm a big fan of his. I was in a study group with him for a number of years a time ago, and I'm sure your listeners probably know his books and his work. He's amazing. The idea of being able to name and talk about feelings, to be able to help kids when they do get dysregulated, to notice, you're really mad right now, or the pictures or the sensations, or if your tummy's upset, or if you've been feeling, and to be able to also do something that's constructive. Some kids dance, some kids run, some kids ride their bike, some kids go out and shoot hoops. To be able to connect action with doing something constructive, with the feelings that get built up when our fight or flight system gets activated, because that, it is our bodies are giving us energy to either fight or run away. And in modern life, usually those are not needed as much as we get those signals to do. And it's really interesting. Peter Levine has this really incredible piece of footage about an animal that's been caught by a predator. And it goes into like a freeze response where it shuts down. And you actually think that the animal is dead, actually. And the predator gets distracted at a certain point, and this deer or whatever it was suddenly leaps up and runs away and escapes. And you're rooting for the deer so much the whole time. But the thing that he was explaining is that part where you go from a shutdown to reactivating and leaping up again into action. That's the thing that keeps those animals from having trauma, like post-traumatic syndromes, being able to function in the world. And part of what we do is helping people come back to life, having people reactivate and re-engage with that system. So when we're upset or stressed out or overwhelmed, we don't have to wait until we're in full-on shutdown. If we can be active in a way that feels good and that can direct that energy so that all that adrenaline and cortisol and everything can kind of burn off, and then you feel kind of spent and a little better. That's a great thing to work on in the summer. That's a really naming it to tame it and then channeling it into action, I think, is a really wonderful way to help kids develop those skills while they have the time to really explore those things more.
That is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful suggestion, because again, you're talking about having the time to kind of develop those skills. And we're living in a world where there's so much that we cannot control and that we cannot predict. And so by helping kids to develop these skills to kind of channel that energy into an adaptive response is so helpful for future occurrences of stressors that are inevitably going to pop up in their lives.
That is such a good point too. The idea of, and I would definitely think that this is an essential part also, that idea of identifying what can we control and what we can't control. I mean, sometimes with kids, we make a circle with our arms, and that's like the circle. Everything inside my circle is something I can do something about right now that helps even a little bit. And everything outside my circle is the stuff that I can't do anything about. So I'm going to really try not to put energy into that because I can't. And to get to lean into the things that we have some sense of agency feels so much better than spinning out on all the other stuff that we can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Cheryl, you have shared some wonderful gems with us today. And I think I'm going to have you come back because there's so much more that we can discuss. But, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your expertise. I know that this is going to be so valuable to parents, to educators, And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. If parents or educators want to connect with you, listeners want to connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Thank you. The best way to do that, my website is askdrcheryl.com. And to reach out to me there, there's a contact button, and I would love to hear from you if people have any questions. And I think the work you do is so incredible, and I have so much respect for you. And it's so delightful to come and talk with you about these issues. So thank you so much.
You are so welcome. It's an absolute pleasure. And I'll make sure that I put a link to your website in the show notes. So thank you again, Dr. Cheryl.
Thank you.
We are so grateful to Dr. Cheryl for coming on the podcast and sharing her expertise with us. Now, Dr. Cheryl doesn't work directly with children, but she works with a number of parents who want help with addressing their own trauma and healing from that trauma. So make sure that you check out her information in the show notes and reach out to her directly. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.